Hi, Conduit. This week, we've been continuing in our sermon series called It's All About Jesus. That's at the center of who we are as a church. We believe that it truly is all about Jesus and that his good news has the power to change everything. And this week, we talked about sort of what is that good news? What does it mean when we say that Jesus' good news has the power to change everything? And so we talked about one of the most famous passages in the Bible where Jesus clearly himself articulates his own message, his gospel, his good news, his salvation. And that's his discussion with Nicodemus, the Pharisee, in John chapter 3. Now, Nicodemus and Jesus have this discussion late at night, and Nicodemus is questioning Jesus. Just who exactly are you? You seem to be doing these miracles that indicate that you're from God, but are you truly the Messiah? And Jesus kind of calls Nicodemus out on that. He kind of says, you should know these things. You're a teacher of the law. You should recognize. And Jesus kind of calls Nicodemus out and indicates that Nicodemus has an element of spiritual blindedness, that he can't see clearly. He can't see the kingdom unless he's been born again. And that causes significant confusion for Nicodemus. What does it mean to be born again? And Jesus says this was talked about all throughout the Bible, that you were going to need spiritual rebirth, and that God's spiritual rebirth is done by his Spirit. And there's this beautiful analogy in that passage of talking about how God's Spirit is like wind. And wind, similarly, I have never seen wind, but we see the effects of wind all around us. And similarly, when there is spiritual new birth, we can't see always exactly how it happened or where it came from, but we see the effects of God's Spirit and him bringing about spiritual rebirth. Because the fact is that we all are like Nicodemus and we don't see things clearly. We are all in our own sort of night or spiritual darkness, and we need that restored vision. And not just to see things clearly, but to see Jesus clearly. Jesus goes on to make a kind of a strange analogy of himself. We looked back at Numbers 21. In Numbers 21, there's this short little story about the Israelites who were complaining in the wilderness and they're being bitten by snakes because God sent these poisonous snakes as punishment for Israel's contempt and rebellion and complaining about all of the good things that God had provided for them. And rather than removing the snakes from Israel, what God did is had Moses take a pole and put a serpent on it. And then anytime anyone was bitten by one of these snakes, they would come and they would look at that serpent on the pole and they would be saved. They would not die from the poison. And Jesus says similarly that he must be raised up on a pole and that all who look to him will be saved. And we see that that's a powerful analogy. Why would Jesus equate himself, though, to a serpent on a pole? What's that got to do? Like, that doesn't seem right, but really when we think about it. Last week when we talked about how the whole story of the Bible can be talked about through the alleviation of the curse and the reversal of the curse that happens in Genesis. We've all heard the story of the serpent and Adam and Eve and eating of the fruit. And so that serpent becomes a symbol of the curse, the fallenness, the brokenness of mankind and sinfulness. And when Jesus Christ died on the cross, he became cursed for us. He who knew no sin took sin upon himself so that he might destroy it. And so Jesus being lifted up on the cross, and we look to him and behold him taking the curse from us as he becomes the bearer of the curse of sin for us. And that's a powerful image that we see in those two stories being compared and being completed in Jesus. And that's ultimately the call that Jesus ends with Nicodemus saying, look to the Son of Man for salvation. For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son, so that whoever believed in him should not perish but have eternal life. And he's saying, I am that one and only Son. I have come to deliver the world, to provide salvation. And all you need to do is simply to look to Jesus. And that's the invitation that we were left with this Sunday, is to look to Christ, to find grace, truth, healing, and spiritual rebirth in Jesus Christ. And it might just sound oh so simple, and it really is that simple. And sometimes we want to overcomplicate it, and sometimes it sounds so simple that we're like, that can't be right. We must not understand that correctly. But Jesus tells us to look to him and find salvation there in faith. So, Conduit, I hope that as you discuss this passage and these ideas, that you are drawn closer to Jesus, that you begin to hear his invitation to you to know him and to experience new life and new spiritual birth. Hope you have good conversations this week, and I hope to see you all this coming Sunday.